Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today we've got a really cool, this one's more of the museum theory side of things, but I consider this sort of a before video about a restoration that we're going to do that we didn't even know we were going to start this year. So, when I started working here 8 years ago, Chief's Mess, which is where we are today, was not on the tour route. It was used during some of our larger encampments when there were too many guests to eat on the mess decks. They would bring out the white plastic tables and white plastic chairs and put additional folks in here in Chief's Mess. But otherwise, it was largely empty. Some of the original fittings that are built into the ship were retained, but much of what else would have been in here was gone, including these original tables. Now, we've done some videos where we found these tables and put them back. So, a couple of years ago, we found this black and white picture. I believe it was from the ship's Hair report, which was a document created around when the Navy gave the ship to the museum. I believe she was still in Navy custody at the time. So it's how this space looked in mothballs, how it looked when the museum got the ship. So that was our only look at how this space was supposed to look. So this picture seems to be taken from roughly that corner of the room, looking at the forward bulkhead. So it doesn't give us everything. We lose a lot of what's on that bulkhead. We have obviously nothing from the back bulkhead where the camera's back is towards. But it's not uncommon for us as the people who are trying to restore this ship to only have one picture of the ship. What I believe happened is the ship comes here, and this space still has a lot of its original fittings. And other parts of the ship that are maybe more accessible, like the officer's lounge off of the wardroom, have had their fittings stripped out by other ships just because it's so easy to take that stuff out of there, that nice furniture, walk it right out that door and take it onto another ship during one of those strip trip raids that occurred on board. So when the museum gets this ship, the space is intact. I assume that my predecessors did everything right and they took pictures of what the space looked like before work started. And I assume that those pictures were saved on a floppy disk, or maybe, this is 2001, maybe it was on a CD-ROM, or maybe it was just on the or maybe it was just on the hard drive of a Windows Vista computer. Anyway, we don't have those pictures, but it's pretty standard, and so knowing that there were professional curators here at the time, I can assume that was done. So we really don't know what this space looked like when we inherited the ship, except for from this. However, we know that some of the stuff in Chief's Brown has been taken and used in other parts of the ship. So my assumption is, since this space was not on the tour route, even in 2018 when I started working here, the space was not on the tour route. So they removed some of the things like the tables that were mounted to the deck to empty the space out to make it usable for another use. Maybe they were thinking about using it as part of the store. Maybe they were thinking about just having more tables and chairs for encampments. Maybe they were thinking about something else. We don't know. And then other things are taken to be used elsewhere. Some of the couches probably go up to the wardroom lounge. We now think that the TV stand goes up to the wardroom lounge. And then still other things, plaques, pictures, things like that, either had been stored elsewhere as part of decommissioning of the ship just for their safety, or being found in here, they were removed from the walls and cataloged by the curatorial department and stored down below in the collection spaces. So, here we are, we've been here for 8 years. Much of that time has been spent just figuring out how the archives are arranged. My predecessor, unfortunately, had medical issues that forced him to leave so we didn't have a transition period. And then we spent years, like close to a half a decade, preparing the ship for dry docking. So that really consumed a lot of my life that would have normally been devoted to the curatorial work. So now that we're back from dry docking, we've finally started to go through some of the collections, including a big box down there, museum-era pictures. So typically those are pictures that volunteers took and gave us, and it's pictures of the ship throughout the museum era. A lot of them are from like the 2000, 2001 time period when the ship is being converted into a museum. Anyway, we finally start to go through this box, and we find this envelope, CPO Mess and Lounge 1984, Scott. These are from Chief Gillis, or Giles, Gorczynski's buddy, 12/24/05. So one of the collections managers received this, put a stamp on it to show to Scott Codger, who was the first curator of the museum. I'm the third. Chief Gorczynski, of course, is the chief who was killed in the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983. His picture actually shows up in some of these pictures. So one of his buddies on board took a set of photographs of each of the four walls in Chief's Mess and in Chief's Lounge. So that is what I really want to talk about in this video, now that we're like 10 minutes into the video. The theory of what we do now that we have these photographs. So obviously these photographs were stored in the wrong place, which is why we'd never run into them. We consider the museum's museum era to be historically significant. It's important to have that documented, and it helps curators like me to be able to go back. So in that collection, and unrelated to these pictures, not in this envelope, was this really poorly lit photo that, again, is taken from probably right about where this table is, towards the forward bulkhead. And we believe this shows the space when the museum acquires it. And it was in with a collection of other stuff from that 2000 time period when we first have the ship and are opening it up. And it would certainly explain why the space is poorly lit at that time. So we now have two pictures of roughly how the space looked when the museum got it, and then four pictures each of this space and the space behind us from when the ship was in service. Now, our period of interpretation is roughly 1990. We're trying to make the ship look like she would have during her last active deployment. That means recovering some of the things that were taken off just before the ship is decommissioned to make her look like she would have around the time she was operating in the Persian Gulf. Some ships, like Battleship Missouri, have a really specific period of interpretation. Frank, Missouri's curator, and I did a video about that back when we were in dry dock and he came to visit us. They have so much photography of that ship from December 7th, 1991, this hugely publicized event where the ship was in Pearl Harbor, that they can make that their period of interpretation. She was still in active service, and they can try to make the ship look like that time period. New Jersey doesn't really have that. In fact, while there's a lot of pictures of the ship from the early 80s when we're the only Iowa around, by the late 80s when there were other Iowas around, they stopped taking pictures of us, and they start taking more pictures of Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa. And so we've actually got fewer pictures from that time period, but 1990 is more or less the configuration we got the ship in. So that's the real obvious choice for interpreting a space. Now, we have this set of pictures from 1984, which is the ship's first active deployment in this 1980s configuration that the ship is in. So normally, this wouldn't be the period that we're looking to interpret. But the golden goose for curators and restoration people is to get a set of pictures like this for a room where it literally shows all four walls of the room. We have almost the best possible view, probably the best possible view of this space attainable in 1984. Like nowadays you can do the like panoramic photos or the three-dimensional scanning and get that sort of stuff. Not during the ship's active life. So this is a really tremendous photo set, and I wish to God we had this for every room on the ship. Now, some of these photos reveal that there were changes in this space. This is the photo looking at the outboard bulkhead, and it shows that there's a TV right there where there's currently a white patch mounted in the bulkhead. If I had to guess, I'd say that's a 1960s TV. This space was almost certainly modified in 1968 and then received lesser modifications in the 80s. We talked about this in a past video where we visited Wisconsin and saw their significantly different Chiefs mess and Chiefs lounges. Because she was not modified in the 60s, was modified in the 80s. And, you know, this brown wood paneling sure screams 60s to me. Anyway, this TV died, or they got a new TV. And so there's a TV stand mounted up there in the corner of the room that does not show up in any of these pictures. Likewise, this same picture shows that there's a table, and it doesn't appear to be pressed up against the bulkhead because there's a tablecloth around it set up over here on this bulkhead, where there are now two serving tables that are more built into the ship. And those don't appear in this picture, so likely added a little bit later on. But other things do show up in these pictures. So for example, against the back bulkhead where we put in the whiteboard, there's this beautiful hand-painted map. We have that map in the collection. So either when the ship was decommissioned, they took it down and put it in a pile of other artwork that was saved on board, or it was still hanging on the wall here when the museum got it. We were worried it was going to be damaged, and we took it down and put it in the collection. Well, now we can put that back up. We don't know for sure that that would have been here in 1990, but because we have a really solid idea that it was here in 1984, we're going to choose to interpret this space more or less like that. Are we going to remove historic fabric? So like I just said, the TV stand there was not here in the 1980s. It would be real easy to cut that off. Nothing's lost. There's still a gap in the wall for a TV. We can just make the period of interpretation for this space 1984, while the rest of the ship is 1990. There are a handful of other spaces that we've interpreted as if it was World War II. The brig, the World War II radio room, Admiral Carney's stateroom. We've talked about them in other videos and our thought process on why we backdated those spaces. But the short of it is, the original equipment for there was missing. So we weren't losing anything. We weren't destroying historic fabric to put in facsimiles. So we're not going to destroy the historic fabric in this space. The TV stand shouldn't be there in 1984 based on this photo set, but we're not going to cut it out and remove it. That's going to stay in place. But we're going to do the best we can to restore the rest of the space to look like it would have. Now, as we look back at the Chief's Lounge, real interesting, the empty wall in there, the inboard bulkhead here in the other space, has a TV stand that we now have in the wardroom. And that makes sense. I can see why my predecessors made that choice. This space was not on the tour route. If there was a TV stand in the wardroom when we got the ship, or when the ship was in service, it wasn't there when we got the ship. That space with its couches and whatnot is a very good refuge for people who can't walk the whole tour route, people who are waiting for a meeting, and so it made sense to move the TV stand up there. But now that this space is on the tour route and we know where it went, we're going to work to get that back down here, get a new TV stand for up in the wardroom. Some other things like the magazine racks, the bookshelves also went missing. Another cool thing, a lot of the paintings and plaques that are in these pictures we still have in the collection. Talked about that before. But if you look in the back of this painting, or this picture of the forward bulkhead of the lounge behind us, So the other side of this wall that's behind me, you can see this framed picture of the Chiefs, which is a fairly common cartoon. Bakuna across the river has a very similar one framed on board her. We didn't have this. Our last Command Master Chief, Chief Marvin Williams, gave it to us earlier this year when he was on board for the ship's reunion in September. So now we not only have it, we know where it went. And we know that it wasn't his personal thing that he brought with him to the ship. It was here in '84 before he started serving on board, and then it was probably gifted to him when the ship was decommissioned. And then he gives it back, the ship is in use again, and we're going to put it right back where it belonged. So that's super cool. There's a couple other features like that. Some of the features are definitely missing. Above the TV, there's a wooden carving of a surface warfare pin. In the lounge, suspended from the overhead, there's 2 ship's wheel chandelier light fixtures. In the lounge, there's at least 3 standing ashtrays by the couches. We're missing all of those features, but I've already done quick Google search. You can find those online. They're a couple $100 each. So we're going to work to raise the money to restore these spaces, acquire things that are as close to original, possibly the same type as what is in these pictures, so that over the course of 2025, we can restore this space to look as close as we can make it to how it would have when the ship was in service. If you'd like to donate to support the ongoing restoration efforts here in Chiefs, now that we've got this absolutely fantastic reference to go by that, quite frankly, bumped this space from a really, really low priority to like priority number 1 for me in 2025, there's a link in the description below to donate. We really appreciate your support. I hope to one day restore the entire ship to the level that we can get out of these pictures. But we just don't have this great photo evidence. If you serve on a ship, especially if your ship is historically significant, you think there's a chance of her being preserved, oh my God. Go through and take pictures of your workspace, your berthing compartment, your mess deck. Take pictures like this one while it's in use, while the space is alive. Curators like me cannot thank you enough. And quite frankly, there are so few pictures of the interior of the ship from when she's in service compared to exterior pictures of the ship that people took. You don't think to take a picture of your living room or your bedroom because you see it every day. But it is so helpful and so great to have pictures like this. I wish we had more of them. Do you still get pictures printed out hard copy, or do you have them all digitally? I really recommend printing them out hard copy because God only knows how many digital photos of the ship have just gone missing as media changes. But these pictures have survived, and so we were able to find them and use them again. Let us know in the comment section down below if you still print pictures out the old-fashioned way. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals. We really appreciate your support. Your support allows us to restore spaces like this one. We really appreciate that, and now we've got a template to go from to restore this space. So we're excited to raise a couple $100 to be able to reacquire the lost objects for this space. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us and the museum. Thanks for watching.